probably a bit of a delay as well between you writing something in the chat box and um, it actually showing up as well. So tonight we're going to talk about other. Hi, Andrea. Hello. We're going to talk about um, digestion and how it relates to chronic fatigue, and it's something I see a lot of for people with chronic fatigue syndrome, even intermittent fatigue. It shows up an awful lot. And so then that begs the question, why is that? Rather than just throw it in the kind of symptom list of the syndrome, the chronic fatigue syndrome, let's kind of tease apart a little bit about why digestive problems play such a role. And are they the cause or are they the effect of the whole thing? And sometimes, as we'll learn, they're a bit of both. Um, so, um, so hi you, glad you've made it. There's some other people there, and I'm sure some other people will be joining too. Um, so let's start by just introducing myself. Kieran Ryan. I'm a qualified nutritional therapist. That's my background, but I've been working in natural medicine for quite a while now. So I've kind of moved into other areas as well. And just how I really got into it all, funnily enough, was really due to my own digestive problems, and I probably had digestive problems since my teenage years. And they were always chronic, always kind of waxing and waning, different times, really restricting my diet, really restricting what I could eat. And I, started developing later on adrenal fatigue, really, and just kind of tired all the time symptoms, and a lot of fatigue that kind of went with the digestive problems, feeling down, also depressed, kind of, clearly my brain wasn't working the best. So I went through a lot of that stuff, and I started getting chronic insomnia then, and that really impacted the energy levels a lot worse, and it all became a bit of a vicious cycle. And what's interesting is that when I really traced it all back, and it did take me quite a long time to figure it out, but when I really you know, got to the root cause of it, it really was those digestive problems that were spiraling everything else out of control. So the constant adrenal fatigue, the constant insomnia and brain fog were all happening in my gut, and issues in my gut were causing those to happen. And then one gut issue would cause other gut issues to spiral out of control. So you start off with one problem, but over time it develops into a few more different problems, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. There's no conventional route. There's not a lot you can do about it. You can get yourself a diagnosis of IBS. And I found doctors that were quite dismissive. You're a young man, you shouldn't be tired, was basically the line that I got. Amazing. Go figure it out yourself, son. So I did. Um, so basically, we're going to talk about um, the mechanisms of what goes on inside the digestive problem. And I think the reason that conventional medicine doesn't do a good job of figuring out digestive problems is that in standard care, they're still kind of taught, doctors are still taught and caught up in the idea that digestion is pretty much a physiological process. So if there's something going wrong with the physiology of the digestion, they can pinpoint that. So they'll stick the scopes down and up, and they'll have a little look around and see if there's something kind of wrong with the machinery, as it were. But oftentimes, so often, people just come back and say, I went to that gastroenterologist and they found nothing. They did an endoscopy and they found nothing. It's such a common story that I've heard so many times. Um, the reason for this again is that there's so much more going on, and to be fair, there's a lot of good gastroenterologists who are really up to date with the research, and they talk about the microbiome, that is all the living organisms that exist within our gut and how that interacts with our gut. But I tend to see and hear about them more in the newspapers or writing articles or stories. As far as I can see, the standard care of what doctors are actually being taught is still very much that it's a physiological problem, and to try and deal with some sort of drug that will regulate the physiology. Um, so really what we've got to look at, and really what's in the last 20 years the research has really started going, and probably catapulted in the last 10 years, is and something that naturopaths were always talking about, funnily enough. People with kind of ponytails and sandals used to be the ones talking about this sort of stuff. And that's the idea that the microbiome, all the little bugs inside the gut, are actually having a profound regulatory effect upon on the gut, and that there's good ones, and there's the good and bad and ugly, really. There's different types of ones, and they have different effects, and really we need the net effect to be kind of anti-inflammatory and life-giving probiotic, and not inflammatory and causing a lot of problems there. Okay, my current frame rate is too low, it's saying, but I don't know how to adjust that. So, um, really, with our microbiomes, all these bugs, they found a lot of the research looks at diversity, and it shows that the more diverse the populations of bugs in the gut, usually the healthier the person. There's very, very strong correlation to say that's true. Um, so, often people will take one probiotic or something and expect that to fix them, but really there's like 1,000 different species within everybody's gut, and that that thousand is actually quite unique to you, and it's unique to your diet, your environment, where you live, your family, hereditary factors, genetic factors. Um, so there's quite a lot of things that actually influence that. The way your body interacts with it, your body can actually promote the growth of certain species and repress the regrowth of other species as well. Your immune system gets involved in that. So all these factors interplay to kind of create the microbiome, which in turn sends out various different end products that have stimulatory or healing effects on the body too. So one of the main ones is butyric acid, for example, and that has massive healing properties. Um, on the other hand, bad bacteria produce LPS, lipopolysaccharide, or endotoxin, which creates a lot of inflammation. So really, you kind of need a balance where you're producing low amounts of this bad stuff and high amounts of this good stuff. And as long as the equation's in the right way, the overall net effect will be a much healthier gut. Um, so diversity is super important because these things kind of work in food chains. One will be a lactic acid producing species like lactobacillus, and that will produce the lactic acid, which then feeds another bacteria, which then produces the butyric acid, which has the healing effect. There's lots of these little feeding chains. It's a whole ecosystem, it's a whole environment, and these different bugs support each other in the microbiome. Um, so it's not just the bugs that live in the gut. It's also the way your immune system is reacting as well. So a lot of your immune system, and I always see different numbers, but let's say 70% is of your whole immune system is focused in your gut, because when you think about it, you put something in your mouth and then it needs to be taken into your body through the gut. So the gut is really the doorway to the body in that sense. It's not really in your body when it's in your mouth, or it's more that your body's kind of wrapped around that. It doesn't really enter the body until it gets past the gut barrier. So that's really the first time your outside environment gets into your body. So you need a good gatekeepers. You need a really strong immune system there. But the immune system, it's kind of temperamental. it needs to regulate itself well. It can be hypo, it can be suppressed, but it can also be hyper. It can be too reactive to things, and that's also a huge problem that people face as well. Um, so when it's hypo, you get infections really easy. You could have a gut infection or a systemic infection in your body. But when it's hyper, you're reacting to all sorts of other things that you shouldn't be reactive and becoming chemically sensitive, food intolerant, having mast cell activation, this sort of thing going on. And interestingly, because the immune system is huge and diverse and there's lots of aspects to it, you can actually have both of those things happening at the same time, which is no fun at all. So, um, so in order to find out about a person's gut, I will generally test in various different ways. One of them is a CDSA, a comprehensive diagnostic stool analysis, which it does what it says on the tin. It's a stool sample sent off to the lab, and you can analyze the microbiome and you can test it. There's different ways of doing it. They can put it in a petri dish, or they can um, test actually genetically now. Genetic sequencing is really getting is super popular these days, and basically you can start to see what different species are in there and what the overall look of the microbiome is like, and what pathogenic species are growing in there and which ones could actually be causing you a problem. You can see all those things, and then obviously you can take some actionable steps. It's a really, really good test to get, and it often answers a lot of problems. Um, a lot of the symptoms of all the different things that can go wrong in your gut are pretty much the same. Bloating, gas, diarrhea, constipation, these sort of pain, these sort of things. They're very typical symptoms. They tell us things are going on, but they're not. They could be so many different things, and you'd want to change your protocol and work in different ways depending on what they are. So getting tested is, I think, a much, much better option. Um, the other test I do now as well is the organic acids test, and this is a really useful test. Can I do screen share here? I don't know if I can. I could a moment ago. This thing is absolutely baffling for me. I'll be honest with you. It keeps changing. Okay, I can't do it right now. But the organic acids test is basically a urine test, and it's really good for people with chronic fatigue syndrome because it basically looks at loads of you get these 78 different organic acids, and they're metabolites that have broken down from other chemical processes in the body, but there are lots of different chemical processes that they measure, and one of them is looking at different types of fungi which are very common and growing in the gut, and even molds like aspergillus, um, which cause mold toxicity and problems in people, neurological problems, chronic fatigue syndrome. Quite often people with that diagnosis have that going on, and that can actually grow in the gut. I recently had a lady who had that exact problem. Can you imagine 20 years of chronic fatigue syndrome, and that's what she's been harboring all along. It took an oat test to come along, an organic acids test to come along and figure that out for her. So knowing what the problem is, you can then create the right process of eliminating that problem. So the organic acids test is really good because it shows you things like molds that could be growing in the body, but it also shows you things like how the mitochondria are doing. And that's very important for people with chronic fatigue syndrome, because really all chronic fatigue syndrome, nearly all of it anyway, is a mitochondrial disorder. The mitochondria, the little powerhouses inside the cells, are not working properly. They're not producing ATP, which is the currency of energy that our body uses to give us energy. That's the mitochondria have become damaged, uncoupled, or they're being suppressed by a cell danger response. That's a different talk, but some sort of foreign threat is causing suppression in the mitochondria. So as the oat test can tell you a lot about the mitochondria, it's really useful information to have. You can start to see where in the mitochondrial pathways things are going wrong, and that can be really useful. You know, you could tell if some hypoxia was going on. There's not enough oxygen getting in to feed the respiration in the mitochondria, or you could start to take a stab at which nutrients that actually would be more effective because that part of the mitochondria is not working so well. So you could support it with those nutrients to boost energy. Often, you know, there's many causes of the mitochondrial issues, but they can be whatever the cause is. Often, a person with chronic fatigue will end up with some damage done to the mitochondria and will need some support as well, just to kind of get those mitochondria so that they heal. Once you've kind of dealt with the other, or even while you're dealing with the other, sometimes other problems, the main problem, supporting the mitochondria is very good as well. So it's a lot more I could say about the oat test. It's very useful on a lot of levels. It also looks at neurotransmitters, which can tell you about brain inflammation, depression, all these things that go with chronic fatigue. So great test to do, but sticking to tonight, it really helps with gut as well and tells us lots of things that are going on in the gut too. Doing that along with the CDSA, which is the stool test, together to give you a very kind of powerful diagnostic picture of what's going on in the gut. So the next thing to talk about is the problems and what actually goes wrong. So what is going wrong with our gut, and why do we end up with all these gut problems um, with chronic fatigue? And you know, mitochondria, which are always going wrong with people with chronic fatigue, are very necessary for the gut to work properly, like to produce the hydrochloric acid, to produce pancreatic enzymes, to produce all that. And so that's one of the reasons I think long term, a lot of people who've had um, these issues end up with gut issues going along with it, because they haven't got enough mitochondrial energy to kind of regulate the gut and keep things motility moving properly. And you know, and when things sort of like get stuck in one place, they start to ferment, and bad things start growing, yeasts and molds and things like that. So that's one reason. But I also think a lot of people that have a chronic fatigue or chronic fatigue syndrome diagnoses, they actually have digestion as the root cause of their problem. It's very common actually that, you know, they just have an undiagnosed digestive disorder that's actually causing them to feel tired all the time. And since it's the standard care wasn't able to define it, they just end up with the in the umbrella group of chronic fatigue syndrome, which is basically, you know, the kind of box that you doctors put people in when they can't really explain what else is going on with them. So the this so when there's too much bad things growing in the gut, we call it dysbiosis. Um, and basically, you've got your yeasts, your bacteria, and your parasites. And your yeasts, as mentioned, molds, which are incredibly toxic and a big source of chronic fatigue syndrome, can also be molds in your home growing in your environment in a damp environment. Very big. If you're living in a damp environment, I'd get that checked out. But um, but they also you know, more commonly you'd find Candida species, Candida albicans, Candida glabrata, um, tropicalis. There's a whole bunch of them. Um, these can be actually quite insidious and sometimes very difficult to get back out of the body as well. Sometimes they can really get a hold in there. They, you know, they like living in inflamed environments, and if the guts become inflamed, they can really kind of niche in, and they can grow their little hyphae. You can imagine these little tentacles growing into your body and kind of, you know, forming a mycelium on the walls of your gut and causing a ton of inflammation. They pump out lots of toxins, 100 different toxins. Acetaldehyde, it's what gives you hangovers from alcohol, is one of their main ones. And this is all to confuse and dysregulate the immune system, which, you know, ends up getting absolutely knackered trying to fight it. So, you know, it then can cause a lot of problems because these toxins go into the body, into the liver gets overwhelmed, into the brain, causes inflammation, hangover feelings, chronic fatigue, can all set in from candida infections. Um, Often, and I'm not entirely sure why, but when a person gets a yeast, probably because the immune regulation, the immune's no longer good at fighting yeasts, I'd imagine. But people get yeasts growing in other areas of their bodies, so thrush or um, when they get it growing in their toenails as well, athlete's foot. Um, they often go hand in hand with that sort of thing, and the person is usually very sensitive to carbohydrates in that case. Carbohydrates really make symptoms far worse. So it's a real sign of yeast growing in the gut, fermenting all the carbs that are there. Low carb diets work great in these situations. They don't deal with the problem per se because these microorganisms are brilliant at making a living. They recently found some in space. Actually, had come from a spacecraft and gotten out, and I don't know. Apparently, we're still hanging out there. I'm not sure they did work that out, but you can look it up. Um, they can live in the most hostile environments, and they can downregulate their metabolism and go into a state where they're just really difficult to they're not interacting much with the environment, and they're immune to the antibiotics even, and they they're amazingly adaptive. So just starving them doesn't tend to work. They can survive an incredibly long time without anything to eat, but it does mean when they're not metabolizing, they're not producing toxins, they're not attacking your body, it does give you a real break and relief from the problems as well. So that's why I really favor low carb diets when people have um, chronic digestive issues. So another thing then is bacteria. There's lots of bacteria in the gut, tons and tons, and most of it's kind of harmless, but then it can really grow out of proportion. Usually, when you don't have enough good bacteria, that gives the space for the bad bacteria to really grow up. There's a lot of different species of them. So do you need to know specifically which ones? No, often I think when people have bacteria overgrowth, overcrowding them with good bacteria and um, sugar again tends to feed them. I tend to think sugar diets are the worst, but some of them eat a lot of protein and stuff. Generally, using a lot of probiotics is good when there's bacteria going on there. Um, Parasites are another thing. It's not something I see from people living here in the West very often in these colder climates. In Britain and Ireland, certainly not. I see it when people go to a tropical country, a hot country. Maybe if you're watching from California or something, it's going on there. Certainly when people have been to Thailand or something, especially third world countries, parasites are they picked up so easily. I myself have had parasites from being in India. They can be single cell protozoans, or they can be, hermites, worms, and they're very good at creating a living, carving out a living in your gut, and avoiding your immune system, causing a lot of inflammation, a lot of problems. Can cause constipation or diarrhea. Oftentimes diarrhea, to be honest. Um, and they are a big source of chronic fatigue syndrome as well, and big source of sensitivities too. When people are showing up with a lot of sensitivities, like to, I can't take this supplement because I'm reacting to it. The kind of mast cell activation, chemical sensitivity stuff going on. That is one of the major causes of that is parasites as well, because they really get this IgE aspect of the immune system working, and this IgE aspect is really what's related to the sensitivities. Um, so yeah, then the other big problem that people get in their guts is leaky gut syndrome, and again that was another um, naturopathic idea that they kind of developed just through clinical practice and smart people, I guess, came up with a working theory. And then later it was shown, it was kind of boo-hooed by the conventional medicine for a long time, for decades. But now it's quite established in the research. You won't find any research looking for leaky gut, but you'll find the research looking for intestinal permeability, meaning that the intestine has now become too permanent. And Dr. Forenzo Alessero, oh, it's been quite a while since I've thought of his name actually. Um, but anyway, it was found, zonulin was found as the key modulator, which opens up these tight junctions. So imagine these are two cells. My hands are two cells, and in the middle there's a gap, and stuff can get through, food and stuff can get through. And if you're quite leaky, it's quite open, and otherwise it should be closed. It's normally called a tight junction, and it should be nice and firm. But at certain times, your body wants to let more in. So, you know, there's lots of things that regulate it. Any type of inflammation will make it leakier. Gluten always makes it leakier. Um, and the problem is that if it gets too leaky, then a lot of undigested, these larger undigested molecules will start getting into the bloodstream, and they really shouldn't be there. You should only be absorbing like amino acids, the little protein building blocks. You shouldn't be absorbing the whole proteins. And if you start doing that, your body will think that those whole proteins are invading organisms, and they'll mount an attack on it. And part of that attack is an inflammatory response to try and lock things down and create a lot of devastating attacks. But there's always a lot of collateral damage, and that damages nearby cells, which actually makes the gut even leakier. And then more food particles get in, and then it becomes a vicious cycle, and you start becoming more and more intolerant to more and more foods. And this then goes on and creates mast cell activation and all that sort of stuff, and start becoming sensitive to everything, and your life becomes miserable. You can't eat anything, your digestion's horrible. You're not sure what you react to anymore, because you seem to react to everything. And you're tired, and you're exhausted all the time, and you have foggy headedness, and you might end up with chronic fatigue diagnoses as well in that case as well, because there isn't a drug that deals with this. So again, it's not part of the conventional care yet. Big pharma are working on a drug to regulate zonulin levels. So as soon as they do, they'll invent training courses, and they'll invent tests, and everyone in the conventional care will know about it, and will have we'll be able to talk about it. So that's a possibility that's coming up in the next few years. But in any case, I never put a lot of money on the effectiveness of these things. I think because it's simple one drug solutions to really complex problems where there's so many things going on. Um, I'm not sure if that will be, but hey, look, we'll see. Um, so you need to look at, if you're getting that sort of thing where you're just reacting to all the foods and stuff, you really need a food intolerance test. Again, food intolerances show up as so many things. They can show up as absolute fatigue. They could show up as insomnia. They could show up as itchiness, readiness, eczema in the skin. They could show up as um, uh, digestive problems, and there's actually just a laundry list of things that could be going on as a result of food intolerances. So as a result, that you can't kind of neatly put it in one diagnostic box. It was often quite boo-hooed as well, especially in the beginning, by conventional medicine. These days the research is very strong. You'll still find websites saying, oh, these tests are not reliable, but that research is well out the window. The research papers are there to show it, that yes, no, there's a very strong IgE reaction to these things. Testing's come a long way itself as well. That's another thing. You really want to test for IgG 1 to 4, not just IG4, which is what a lot of the old tests were looking at. Some other tests will also test for IgA, IgM as well, because there can be reactions with that too. So getting a really good test, I look at a couple of different tests depending on the case scenario, but getting a couple of different tests is okay. Hang on, I'm just gonna stop a second. Is the video pausing for others? Are you still finding that problem? Because it has been giving me a little warning that my something about rate is too low and I need to change it. I'm just gonna have a quick look if I can do that. Let me know if this video is looking okay at your end. Just tell me there. Um, okay, when it gives me another warning, I'll see if I can fix it. But you can let me know if it's working at your end okay, or if it's a bit jumpy. Um, okay, where was I? Oh yes. So yeah, you need to kind of figure out what is the cause of the problem. Um, and here it is. It's telling me now. And okay, I just have to go on. It looks like a real technical problem. I'll need to fix it the next day. Um, so you kind of need to get a good test and then look at all the things that you are intolerant to and take them out of the diet, you know. And then you need to give your immune system a break where you're having no symptoms. You've just got to like, you know, and if the test says something's okay and then you still get a symptom from it, you still got to take it out. And you can retest 6 months later, bringing stuff back in slowly. Dairy and gluten are the two biggest offenders. Um, Soya is a big one too, but it could be pretty much anything. And so you've got to basically just eliminate them for a long time. Things like vitamin D, butyric acid, which I talked about, the good bacteria producing, um, vitamin A, glutathione. These really help regulate the immune system and they can reduce the time it takes to recover from leaky gut syndrome. But it's still hopefully ideally, you know, you could do it in 3 months. You could probably get most of your foods back in 3 months. There probably be those lingering one or two for 6 months, you know. um and that's if you did it well. And I often find people are in a very confused state when they're in this state, so they don't do it well. So you know, unfortunately it can take up to a year to heal all this. You know, it's quite a mess, but it utterly derails people's lives, you know. I've had people dropping out of university. They can't do it anymore because this is it's just ruined their life, you know. Very, very tough situation to deal in leaky gut. um, and no good getting a chronic fatigue diagnosis. How the hell does that even help you when you've got this going on? You know what I mean? So it's again, you know, about finding the root cause of the problem. And so for some people, it's leaky gut syndrome. Um, so chemical sensitivities, let's see, they can also be created. Leaky gut can cause then chemical sensitivities, liver detoxification problems, lots of toxins being produced. The first place stuff goes from the gut is to the liver. So the liver then has to clean all that stuff out before it goes into the blood. And so oftentimes when someone has really bad gut issues, the liver is really underwhelmed and overburdened as well. Um, okay, so another thing then, that problem that goes wrong with the gut is enteroviruses, and these are also a direct cause of chronic fatigue syndrome. Um, they are things like Coxsackie virus or echovirus. They get in through the gut and they cause gut problems. They mightn't as well, but they they might get fought off and destroyed in the gut. But if they make their way into the body, then they can travel to the liver and the spleen and the brain, and cause all sorts of problems, and cause the body to go into cell danger response and shut down as well. So enteroviruses, something that wouldn't show up on a stool test, they would show up on a blood test. You know, so you've got to You might have to dig deeper. You might do these other tests with somebody and find nothing shows up, but they still got digestive issues. Really worth checking for enteroviruses then at that point. So it's kind of like you've got to kind of keep peeling the onion. You've got to keep Sometimes you've got to keep doing investigative work until you get to the point where you understand properly what the root cause of what's going on. And I like to think that's probably about 50% of the journey. 50% of the journey from recovering from chronic fatigue is really the investigative part and really nailing down what that root cause is. And then the other 50% is tailoring protocols, working through the protocols until you've actually got the protocol that really works with that person's body. And because everybody's different, everyone's reacting in different ways and different things. So you've got to kind of like do a little bit of trial and error on both of those two stages to get through the whole thing. Um, so that being said, that's all the issues. And if you have any problems, do let me know. Or if you have any questions, do let me know as well. I know, apologies if the video is being a bit if it's stopping and starting. There seems to be some technical problem, and I don't really know how to actually fix that. I can't do two things at once, so I'll just carry on. But you can just let me know how it's going in the comments section anyway. Um, Recovery. So how do you recover from all this stuff if you've got it going on? I think I talked enough about the leaky gut and really what the recovery would be there. The dysbiosis I touched on, um, but really you've got to support different aspects in tandem. I've often found that supporting one aspect doesn't really work. That you kind of have to support all the aspects of the gut in order to help. So one part you can always start with is your liver. A lot of the time, a lot of the bad symptoms you're feeling are because of detoxification problems. Liver pathways have been overwhelmed, blocked pathways. So supporting, the liver to get it working properly. If the liver isn't working properly, the bile won't be released. The bile comes out of the liver, and if the bile isn't released, then you won't emulsify fats. That causes a lot of digestive problems. So supporting the liver is a really good way to go. So I love turmeric. I always talk about it. It's fantastic stuff. Milk thistle is also really good as well for liver support. If the bile is blocked, then dandelion or artichoke can really help to get things moving in the right direction as well. There's a whole bunch of herbs really that would be liver supportive. But I would just stick to those main ones for now because I find they're my top ones. So I'll just won't overwhelm you. Um, the Another thing then would be to support the actual digestion as well. If there's something going wrong, digestion really tends to go wrong. If you find food is just sitting in your stomach and it's not going anywhere, then I would look at hydrochloric acid. Um, if you find the hydrochloric acid burns you or you got a burning sensation, then I would look at DGL, dysregulated disglycerated licorice, which kind of insulates the gut. So it's about creating more mucus. But I would also look at taking digestive enzymes, can be very helpful. If your pancreatic enzymes are low, digestive enzymes can help you break down your food properly. Sometimes when you don't know what to do and your digestion's just going wrong, and this was me for years when I didn't understand the digestion properly, just taking digestive enzymes can really help. Really help. I used to just live on the things, to be honest with you. I used to be taking them every meal, every time. Because I wasn't able to fix the root cause at the time, so I was getting by. But at least I was getting by. There's a lot to be said for getting by, really, isn't there? At least you live to fight another day. So better to be doing that than just soldiering on and suffering mercilessly. So digestive enzymes are very, very helpful. Just breaking things down. You tend to be less reactive to foods when they're broken down. You're much less reactive. Your broken down foods get absorbed faster, so there's less food lying around for bad things to eat as well. Um, So another thing then would be to support the immune system. Beta glucans are very useful. Mushrooms like shikate, matake are very good. Um, these are just upping the strengthening the immune system in the gut. And by strengthening the immune system in the gut, you are um, um, helping the immune system get back on track so it's able to kill off the invaders as well. A lot of the time the immune system's being weakened by the invaders, so giving them, strengthening them is good. But also lowering inflammation as well. So again, uh, you might take something like boswellic acid or turmeric again, curcumin, that might actually help calm the immune system, calm the inflammation as well. Again, turmeric really good for that. Um, then supporting the microbiome, you know, supporting the microbiome. Fermented foods are very good, like kefir and stuff like that. The only downside to fermented foods is they're very high in histamine, and if you're very reactive to things, then you've probably got histamine intolerance going on. It comes with mast cell activation, which comes with um, chemical sensitive immune intolerance, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, so it's a bit of a mixed bag. If you can use them and you don't react to them and you don't become chronically fatigued, or sorry, just really fatigued from taking high histamine foods, brilliant. They can clear out bad stuff like no one's business. They're especially kefir I love. And you can get the water kefir if you don't use the other one. But unfortunately, people, and especially people who are really sick, just won't get away with using those because they're just too reactive to them. It's unfortunately so because they are such a good tool. Using the right probiotics, S. boulardii, Saccharomyces boulardii is very useful. Good quality probiotic is useful too. Mightn't cut the mustard. It really depends on the problem. Bacterial overgrowth, very useful. S. boulardii, really good for yeasts as well. But again, you've got to do all the other stuff as well. If it's a hostile environment, it's just not going to do that well, you know. So the best long-term strategy to really having a healthy microbiome is to feed the good guys. So a lot of time it's what you're feeding the microbiome that creates the microbiome, that creates the species that are living in the microbiome. So if you're eating a high carbohydrate, high refined food, lots of refined sugar diet, then yeah, you're going to be feeding all the yeasts and bad bacteria and parasites and stuff like that, and they're going to have a field day. If you eat lots of fibers, you're going to be feeding the good guys. So your good guys really love soluble fibers, which you get from fruits and vegetables. But again, if you're in that stage where you're ill, then probably stay away from the fruits, more go for the vegetables. Normally, if you're healthy, lots of fruits, fantastic. But if you're in that, like the microbiome is being compromised, I wouldn't put any sugar in, basically, to be honest with you. Again, I favor low carb diets in those situations. Um, and I would feed a lot of really good types of fiber. And so, how would you get a lot of fiber in? Well, what I like to do, and this is the best trick I've seen so far, is to get a blender and get a whole bunch of different vegetables. Get cabbage. I like cabbage because it's healing for ulcers and healing for the stomach ulcers and ulcers in the intestine as well. And put cabbage in there, and then put just a selection of different vegetables in, and um, then you're going to need something, if you're going to use it as a smoothie, maybe with some avocado. Avocado has histamine as well, though, so if you're very sensitive, just watch that one. But maybe coconut is really a good form of healthy fats there. It's also anti-yeast as well, coconut, so you could kind of put some of that in as an energy source, and then maybe some stevia, or as a sweetener, which is bad for candida. or some xylitol or something. These are non-sugar sweeteners, and you basically just make a concoction out of that. Use water and make a concoction out of it. Is it the most delicious meal on the earth? No. Is it helping your microbiome tremendously to grow? Yes. So at this stage you're looking at food as medicine, so you can put your culinary needs aside and start doing what is actually just really super beneficial for your body. Um, and this is powerful. This is a powerful tip I'm giving you here. A really, really powerful tip, because if you do this every day over a number of months, you will really up the levels of good bacteria. Often, when you do stool tests on people who have bad guts, you find loads of species are just really low. The lactobacillus, the bifidobacteria, E. coli. Some of those are actually really beneficial. There's bad E. coli and good E. coli. Um, Lots of different things are just on the floor, and you have actually got to pick them up by giving them a good source of fuel, and they'll start to balance each out, and they'll change the pH in their favor. The bad stuff tends to like a more alkaline environment. The good stuff tends to be more acidifying. So they'll create the environment that helps them grow. Then they'll regulate your immune system, make your immune system stronger. Your stronger immune system will start killing off the bad guys. They'll work in tandem with each other, and they'll get back on track. So feeding the good guys is one of the most powerful strategies you can possibly do. Lots of soluble fibers, lots of vegetables, and the best way to do that is to make that concoction that I just described. Try to eat up to 20 different types of vegetables a week, because different things like, some bacteria will feed on inulin, some will feed on oligosaccharides, fructooligosaccharides. Some will feed on resistant starches. You can even buy various powders like potato starch or rice bran, or so something like that, and add it into your drink as well, and get more fiber in there, and boost up the fiber levels, and just knock it back every day. And I would take it as a meal myself. But if you're doing that, put some fats in there so that you've got some energy going on as well. Um, so that is my top tip on that. So the only thing I could really always talk about is using antimicrobials, and I won't get into it here because antimicrobials, there is a ton of them, natural ones, an absolute ton of them, and they all work with different ways with different things. They have different effects at different times, and they work better with different problems than others. So it's just, I wouldn't know where to start really with talking about it. Um, so, I mean, you can try some over the counter stuff to see if it helps, but I would stick to those other strategies that I've described tonight, and that should fix the problem over a number of months. It should actually kind of fix the whole thing. If you've got parasites or something, you might need to look into dealing with using some proper antimicrobials, and it might be different for everyone, um, wormwood or black walnut, or there's a lot of different things using in combinations, and sometimes you've got to try different ones, and sometimes you've got to do them for quite a while as well, a number of months sometimes, even. It depends on how stubborn and how dug in, because these bad bacterias and fungi, they create biofilms around themselves that protect them then from your immune system, and protect them against everything else, and so they become very encapsulated and rooted into your body, and so they can be tough when they're in those states to shift back out, so they can take a bit of time as well. um that's everything I have to say. I hope you've enjoyed this talk, and I hope you've gotten some value out of it, and I hope you've gotten a lot of value out of it, and you know where to start with your digestive problems, and you are starting to formulate an idea about what your plan can be. Um, if this is something you want help with, or you're looking at chronic fatigue and you're trying to figure out what the root cause of your problem is, and you want help working with somebody that will actually help you to do that, and to figure out what your chronic fatigue problem actually is, what the root cause is for you. Then you can get in touch with me. I do a discovery call where I have a chat with you about what the possibilities are and what working with me would look like. So you can just get in touch with me. You know where I am. You'll find me in this group. You can send me a message. Um, and that's it. So if there's any other questions, I'll answer them. And everyone's been very quiet for a while. Or the questions are just not showing up. I've no idea. But if there isn't any more questions, I'll finish off now then. We have about 5 minutes, so you're very welcome, Helen. Okay, so I think I'll go try figure out what this frame rate issue was, and um, and I shall leave you there. So thanks very much for being here, and talk again soon. Bye for now.